brake, a device for slowing or stopping a moving vehicle, typically by applying pressure to the wheels. So, I speak, they want me to keep going, I need to slow down, I need to stop, I need to put the brake. Well, it's not a type of vehicle. Well, a horse is a type of way to vehicle. Jesus sat on the horse. He needed an ass and a colt. Why two? He can only sit on one of them. So why the ass and the colt? The thing about the vehicle, there is a way, and then they cast their garments on the way, and there is the garments, the clothes, over the horse themselves. And Jesus is advancing somewhere, riding, either the ass or the colt, because there was, does it say even? Because there is ass and colt. First question, why does he need them? Why there are two? And it doesn't explain in the Bible, so where do you get the answer then? You need an interpret.
And so we meet again, hey Jonathan? I've got some input for you to ponder over, because it didn't seem like you were very forthcoming when you came to your conclusion as to why Jesus needed to have two horses. Why not just one?
First question, why does he need them? Why there are two?
Just one horse. Like it describes this very same triumphal entry event as happening in the other Gospels. Those Gospels just say it was one. Because when you were reading Matthew 21, you came to the conclusion that there were two horses in the story. You said that you were one of them and Mary Ann was the other one. Only you said that you were the colt, right? Now this clip's about 13 minutes long, but you really need to see for yourself just how anal that you can get. Because you really stretch and reach for a lot of the conclusions that you come.
So you're talking about an ass? And this is pretty much where I'm going to go with this brake stuff. Because you remember? So you just call me an ass. But I'm more of a colt. And all this was done that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet, saying, Tell ye the daughters of Sion, behold, the king cometh unto thee meek, and sitting upon an ass, and a colt, the foal of an ass. And the disciples went and did as Jesus commanded them, and brought the ass and the colt, and put on them their clothes, and they set him thereon. And a very great multitude spread their garments in the way.
But that was in the book of Matthew, where we found out that there were two separate asses being spoken of here. But what do the other Gospels have to say about it? Because according to the other three Gospels, they only state that it was a single ass, not two. So that's going to have to mean that either you or Mary Ann are going to be walking a lot, especially since you're going to have to share the same ass. So let me show you what I'm talking about here. And to do that, I'm going to read Matthew 21, verses 1 through 7, as what's known as the triumphal entry. And we're going to pinpoint as to how we can be sure that it's talking about there being two separate horses. Matthew 21:1. And when they drew nigh unto Jerusalem, and were come to Bethphage, unto the Mount of Olives, then sent Jesus 2 disciples, saying unto them, Go into the village over against you, and straightway ye shall find an ass tied, and a colt with her. Loose them, and bring them unto me. So if I'm not mistaken here, it says that Jesus sent 2 of his disciples, telling them that they were going to find an ass tied, and a colt with her. So that's clearly describing 2 separate asses. You have the ass, and then you have the colt that's with the ass. That's 2. And then Jesus told his disciples to loose them and bring them unto me. So when Jesus said to loose them and to bring them, isn't the word them a plural word, meaning more than one, right? So in the Gospel of Matthew, the word them has to be describing 2 horses, right? I mean, just wait, because I'm going somewhere with this, Jonathan. I know how you don't let all the information come out before you start going off half-cocked with all your word magic accusations. Because believe it or not, we're sitting here today because you didn't know what I meant by using the word anal to describe your actions. And the word's definition completely fits the bill to help describe your characteristics to a T. But because you have a hard time communicating with people, you turned it into meaning that I was calling you an ass. And then with a little bit of that word magic that you like to sprinkle on everything, and then you turned that ass into the ass that's in Matthew 21 that Jesus rode in on for the triumphal entry. I mean, that's a pretty big leap to be making there, don't you think, Jonathan? Especially since I never even brought up the word ass. That was all your word magic being strewn about.
You remember? So you just called me an ass.
But anyways, let's get back to Matthew here and continue with verse 3. And if any man say aught unto you, ye shall say, the Lord hath need of them, and straightway he will send them. So the words them here, they're used in the same sense as it just was used when Jesus said to loose them and to bring them. It's plural. Verse 4. And all this was done that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet, saying, Tell ye the daughter of Sion, Behold, thy king cometh unto thee, meek and sitting upon an ass, and a colt the foal of an ass. Now when it says that all this was done so that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet, it's referring to Zechariah 9:9. And I'm going to show you that passage as well, but let's just finish up with the verses that Jonathan says describes him and Mary Ann as being the horses. Verse 6. And the disciples went and did as Jesus commanded them. And what did Jesus command them to do again? He said that they were going to find an ass tied and a colt with her, to loose them and to bring them unto him. And the disciples did exactly what Jesus told them to do. They brought the ass and they brought the colt. That's 2. Matthew 21:7. And brought the ass and the colt, and put on them their clothes, and they set him thereon. So where it says in verse 7 that they set him thereon, it doesn't really say which one it was that he sat upon, does it? Was it the ass? Which would have been a female, because it was the mother of the foal. And the foal means nothing more than a baby horse. But to say that the foal was a colt, that meant that it was a male, and that it was less than a year old. Because after a year, they start to be known as yearlings. But anyways, a male foal is called a colt, and if it were to have been a female foal, it would have been called a filly. Got it? Okay then. So now it's been established that Matthew was talking about there being 2 separate asses that Jesus sent his disciples to bring back. And with that being established, let's take a look at the other 3 Gospels and see how they wrote down and recorded what's supposed to be the very same event, the triumphal entry. But for some reason, Jonathan, this is where Mary Ann's going to lose her horse, because in the rest of the Gospels, Jesus only asked for 1 animal to be brought back, not 2 separate animals. So let's compare these Gospels to what you read out loud to everybody, and then I'm going to ask you why there's such a difference between these readings. Mark 11:1. And when they came nigh to Jerusalem unto Bethphage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives, he sendeth forth 2 of his disciples, and saith unto them, Go your way into the village over against you, and as soon as ye be entered into it, ye shall find a colt tied, whereon never man sat. Loose him, and bring him. And if any man say unto you, Why do ye this? Say, The Lord hath need of him, and straightway he will send him hither. And they went their way, and found the colt tied by the door without in a place where 2 ways met, and they loose him. And certain of them that stood there said unto them, What do ye, loosing the colt? And they said unto them, even as Jesus had commanded, and they let them go. And they brought the colt to Jesus, and cast their garments on him, and he sat upon him. So why is everything in Mark's Gospel being described in the singular? Isn't this a synoptic gospel that's supposed to be describing the same conversation? The same conversation between Jesus and his two disciples? Sure, there's to be a little bit of discrepancies expected between how each of these authors wrote down and described the events and what Jesus said, but this is a little over the top for me, Jonathan. Because Jesus never had a separate conversation with different disciples when he told them to go and bring back both an ass and a colt. These were the very same disciples that the other gospel writers wrote about. So where did Matthew hear that Jesus told his disciples to bring back 2 animals? Because in the very same conversation between Jesus and his disciples, the other 3 gospel writers, Mark, Luke, and John, why is it that they only heard Jesus telling his 2 disciples to bring back 1 single animal and not 2 like Matthew stated? It was the same conversation being recorded by all 4 gospel writers, wasn't it? So why such a discrepancy? And it's rather an obvious discrepancy at that, because there's a huge difference between Jesus telling his disciples to bring back 2 animals or to bring back only 1 animal. At least I think so, and that's what's going on here. And then in Luke, if you read it, the entire passage is talking about the same thing, just a single colt. It's clear that he wasn't tied to an ass like Matthew states. There's not even an ass in the passage, just 1 single colt.
You remember? So you just called me an ass.
1929. Right there, he sent 2 of his disciples, saying, Go ye into the village over against you, in which at your entering ye shall find a colt tied, whereon yet never man sat. Loose him and bring him hither. It's all about singular. Loose him. Need of him. Verse 33, And as they were loosing the colt, the owner said thereof unto them, Why loose ye the colt? It's all about singular colt. And they said, The Lord hath need of him. That's the singular. And they brought him to Jesus, and they cast their garments upon the colt, and they set Jesus thereon. So it would have been, they set Jesus thereon, 1 single colt. There was no ass. Because let's put the first 2 verses from each one of the Gospels out there, from Mark and Luke, and then we're going to compare those verses to the first 2 verses in Matthew. And if what I'm thinking that I'm seeing here isn't real, please tell me, Jonathan. But what I'm seeing is the Gospel of Matthew describing something completely different than Luke or Mark did. And even though John's Gospel didn't take it quite as far as the others, it's still very easy to tell that it was a single ass that Jesus requested. A single ass that would have been described as being a colt or a male baby ass. Why don't the other 3 Gospels mention the mother ass like Matthew did? They only mentioned the colt. John 12:14. And Jesus, when he had found a young ass, sat thereon, as it is written, Fear not, daughter of Sion. Behold, thy king cometh, sitting on an ass's colt. So it would have been Jesus sitting on a colt which came from an ass. That's what it's saying. It's not saying that Jesus requested 2 animals. In Zechariah 9:9 is where he was talking about the word being fulfilled. It says, Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, thy king cometh unto thee. He is just, and having salvation, lowly, and riding upon an ass, and upon a colt the foal of an ass.
Jesus sat on the horse. He needed an ass and a colt. Why 2? He can only sit on one of them. So why the ass and the colt? And when he was come nigh, even now at the descent of the Mount of Olives, the whole multitude of the disciples began to rejoice and praise God with a loud voice for all the mighty works that they had seen. The performance. There is all kind of performance. When you talk about how was he performing? Did he perform well? What was his performance? How would you rate him over his performance?
So Jonathan, you're asking me about how I would rate your performance. Because you did inform me that there was going to be a performance, And you haven't let any of us down, that's for sure. Because you've been consistently performing, day after day, clear up until this very day. But now you want to know how I would rate you. So are you sure that you want to ask me that question right now? Right now, while you're in the middle of telling everybody that Jesus told his 2 disciples to go and bring back an ass and a colt? Because if I were to rate you on this story alone, it wouldn't be very high marks that I'd be giving to you. Because did you see what you just read out loud to everybody? You were reading out part of the very same triumphant entry story from the book of Luke. Just like you read out the triumphant entry story from the Gospel of Matthew. But for some reason, you never pointed out the stark differences between the 2 passages. You don't tell anybody at all that there's no longer an ass in the picture when Luke is describing the story. Jesus is only talking about a single colt. So why did you neglect that part of the story, Jonathan? Shouldn't that have been part of your performance rating as well? And why didn't you let anybody else know that Mark and John only spoke about a single colt as well? But I'm not seeing any of that information being included with your performance. So when were you going to let everybody else know about the other Gospels disagreeing with Matthew? Or was it going to take people too far off their track with the whole parable of the story, meaning that the ass was Mary Ann and the colt was you? Because we can't let any of those other synoptic Gospels interfere with what you say that the meaning of something really is. So when were you going to eventually tell anybody the truth about these passages being different? Or were you just going to let it all sit the way that it was, without anybody being none the wiser? Because I'm pretty sure that that's exactly what you did here. And now that I've shed the light on your little charade here, I have a feeling that you're going to try to explain it all away by saying that all the Gospels are actually telling the same event, only it's the same event that's been recorded from another time period. Doesn't that sound about right, Jonathan? Just like the excuse you gave me for the other passages in the Bible, you know, the ones that I pointed out to you. And those will be brought up eventually, but for now, I want to focus in on why you're doing what you're doing, and not telling the entire truth of the story. You just keep telling only your version of the truth. And for that, I give you an extremely low ratings mark.
He's saying simply that he needs them. He needs the ass and the colt, which are names for horses. We know that Jesus, he sits on a white horse, and the white horse upon whom he is sat, because it's a person. The horse is a person. It's not just an animal. The parable. You know the parable. So you've got the ass and the colt, and I believe that it would be you and me. So basically, what I mean to say is that it's 2 horses. You already identified yourself as a horse, wild and rebellious. But I'm the colt. Not the colt like a cult leader, but a colt.
And you see, this is where I think your pride starts getting in the way once again, Jonathan. Because you're telling us that by them just saying that the Lord had need, if anybody were to question them as to why they were untying the colt. But you say that it's not a good enough explanation, though, to just tell somebody that the Lord had need for the colt. So what did you do then? You promptly stood up and said that you were the one that was supposed to give the explanation.
And if any man asks you, why do you lose him? Is there any reason given? It's just saying he had need. The Lord had need of him. Well, that's not much of an explanation then. So who's going to give the explanation? It's me. It's me.
And again, Jonathan, you earned yet another low rating mark for this interpretation. So why do you think that Jesus' explanation wasn't good enough? Because that's what you said. When the disciples answered the people by saying that the Lord had need, why wasn't that good enough? Because they were saying the very thing that Jesus had instructed them to say. So what makes you think that you're in a better position than Jesus was to give an explanation as to why his disciples said what? I mean, you read Luke 19:33 and 34, and you made it sound like this was something that the disciples had made up on their own. But that wasn't the case, Jonathan. They were following what Jesus told them to do. And if you would have even considered verse 31 as being part of this whole thing, you would have plainly seen in red letter where Jesus told them to say that the Lord hath need of him. Shouldn't that be a good enough answer, especially since it came directly from Jesus? And then in Matthew 21:3, in the very passage that you started with, it has Jesus telling the two disciples the very same thing. Tell them that the Lord hath need of them. And then in Mark 11:3, we find the same thing. So why do we need your explanation for something that Jesus already said the explanation for? In 3 separate Gospels, no doubt. But for some reason, you think everybody needs your explanation if they really want the truth. And that's not the case.
Is there any reason given? It's just saying he had need. The Lord had need of him. Well, that's not much of an explanation then. So who's going to give the explanation? It's me. It's me. Why lose ye the colt? Like it's an evil thing. If you lose the colt, something bad happened. And they said the Lord had need of him. So the colt is like a savage. But Jesus saying he's doing more to me, for me, than you. It's like Peter. Peter seems to be an ignorant, useless child, but he is very close to Jesus because he feeds the sheep more than all the other disciples altogether. And if any man ask you, why did you lose him, thus shall ye say unto him, because the Lord... I mean, if you ever wanted to know something about Jesus, where did you get the answer when nobody can find it? Because the Lord had need of him. And they that were sent went their way, and found even as he had said unto them, and as they were losing the colt, the owners thereof said unto them, why lose ye the colt? And they said, the Lord had need of him. It doesn't seem that they are even asking any permission or paying for it, or they just rob him of his coat. You see, ass, wild donkey, it's this. You've got the scriptures talking about Jesus needed them. And there is not just an ass, or there is not just a colt. Why those two horses? What they do in the Bible, what's the role? It's not saying the reason. So I'm telling you. Because else, where are you going to get it?